Hi, boys and girls. It's Mrs. Kowalski. The next story that we're going to work on for this week is called Picnic Guests. And please pay very close attention because we're going to do this reading lesson on it and answer the questions, as well as do a book report about it later for your writing. We are going to talk about the genre, which is fantasy. Remember, genre means what type of reading is it? What type of story is it? It is fiction, which is not real, make-believe, but fantasy, that it is imaginary. And we can tell that it's imaginary because the dog talks, the ants talk, and so on. Okay, the words that we're going to focus on, the vocabulary words are blinked, like you blink your eyes. Forgotten, if you have forgotten or did not remember something. Forming, something is forming like it takes place or it is starting to begin to happen. And guests, that's an important word for this story. Your guests are people that come to visit that you may want to celebrate with or have over as your guest or somebody that comes to visit you. Okay, this story is called Picnic Guests. I'm going to read a little bit more this time and not highlight as much until after I'm finished reading so that you can get the whole way of speaking of the characters in the story. Okay, let's begin. Picnic Guests. Buddy napped in the noonday sun. His furry golden belly faced the blue sky. His 4 legs stuck straight up like fuzzy fence posts. Crunch, crackle, crunch. Buddy's eyelids popped open. What was that noise? Crunch, crackle, crunch. The noise came from somewhere in the grass, and it was growing louder. Suddenly, Buddy jumped back. Something was marching toward him. A long parade of something very tiny and very noisy. A parade of ants. Buddy blinked his eyes. The tiny insects carried teeny forks and knives. Some lugged lawn tents and chairs. Where are you going? Buddy asked. To a picnic, of course, said the ant leader. Why don't you come along with us? Buddy snorted in surprise. Why, thank you, he said. That's very kind of you. Buddy looked carefully at the ants marching through the grass. Something was missing. Excuse me, said Buddy. I'd love to join you, but I think you've forgotten something for your picnic. Forgotten something? The ant leader stopped. What could we possibly have forgotten? Why, the food, of course, said Buddy. All the ants squealed with laughter. The ant leader pointed to Buddy's food dish. The food is already there. Buddy gulped. That was his food. He felt a snarl forming. But then Buddy looked at the giggling ants. His snarl stopped halfway up his throat. These ants were guests, his guests. A slow smile pulled on the corners of his mouth. Woof, woof, barked Buddy. Welcome. He grabbed his favorite ball and joined in the picnic parade. Okay, I'm going to go back and highlight some important things. Napped, as you can see from the picture in your book. Oh, and by the way, I did put this in my blog, but this story begins on page 236 in your reading book. Noonday means that it was around noon, 12 noon, when he was taking his nap. I love how they describe him here with many adjectives. We talked about adjectives being describing words. Furry golden belly, faced upward because he's lying on his back. We don't have to highlight any of that right now. I'm going to highlight noise because he hears some noise coming. And then he hears the noise growing louder. Suddenly something was marching toward him. A lot of times when people describe ants, they describe them as marching in a line because that's what ants really do in real life. They do march and follow each other. It was like a parade. It was very tiny, very noisy. They were tiny and they were making a lot of noise. They will ask about that later in the questions, so I'm going to highlight that. Going to highlight blinked. That was one of our vocabulary words. That will also be your spelling words. All of your words that I highlighted in the beginning of the vocabulary, those will also be some of your spelling words this week as well. They carried teeny forks and knives as they're getting ready to eat. That's, again, a way that we know that it is a fantasy. Yes, ants do parade and they do like to circulate around picnics, but we know it's a fantasy because ants would not be carrying forks and knives to get ready for a picnic. Lugged just means that they are carrying something. Okay, and then Buddy snorted, and you can talk about why do you think he snorted and why do you think he was surprised. And then he noticed that something in their picnic was missing. He thought that they were going to have their own food, bring their own food. And then later in the story, we realize that they're going to eat his food. Okay, so when we turn to that, and when he says, why the food, of course, we notice that he's surprised that they're going to be eating his food, that they didn't bring any of their own. This is going to be important when you fill out your book report later, when you do your writing. What do you think Buddy learned? Because he gulped and he was not very happy. It said he felt a snarl forming. He was going to snarl or bark or maybe be upset with them, but then it stopped halfway in his throat because he realized these are his guests. And he decides, let's all have a picnic together. And he does welcome them to enjoy his food as well. So he decides to join them in the end and to not be upset about sharing his food with them. Okay, so what you will be answering is on page 239, which of the following is an example of alliteration in the story? Alliteration, and I will write this down for you here. Alliteration in a story means words that begin with the same sound. So, for example, if there are a lot of letter F sounds in the story, in that sentence all together, if there are a lot of letter C sounds, if there are a lot of letter G sounds, whatever the sound might be, if there are a lot of letter sounds that are repeated in the sentence, that is what we call alliteration. Words that begin with the same sound. Okay, and then number 2 says this question has 2 parts. First answer part A, then answer part B. Reread the paragraphs 6 and 7. And so you will reread these 2 paragraphs. Which words are repeated? So you're going to go ahead and underline which words did they repeat. So as an example, in this sentence, they say very more than once. So that means it is a repeated word. So wherever they repeat words in these 2 sentences, which words list the words that are repeated? Okay, and then this question, part B, look at the words you wrote in part A. Which answer below best explains why these words are repeated? Why did they repeat those words? Number 3, read the sentence from paragraph 11. Buddy looked carefully at the ants marching through the grass. What is the base word of the word carefully? So if you're looking at just the word carefully, again, remember base word means if it has no prefixes in the beginning of the word and no suffixes at the end of the word. What is that main part of that word? What is the base word of carefully? Number 4, which answer best explains why guess is repeated in paragraph 18? Why do you think they repeated that word, guests? Okay, and now this following writing portion we are not going to do because you are going to do another writing sample about this story after in my next lesson. Okay, thank you for listening.